Hey, welcome back everybody. Good Monday evening. Got a big time update here for you on, again, what is about to become tropical storm, eventually hurricane, and very likely major hurricane Helene into the Gulf of Mexico. Again, this is looking to shape up to be the storm of the year so far, at least here during this hurricane season. And unfortunately, again, this could become a major hurricane that will likely strike portions of Florida and move inland through Georgia and the Carolinas from Thursday into Friday. And this is one of those storms I think isn't just going to be a coastal concern. You folks well inland into, again, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, potentially Alabama and Tennessee could see some big time impacts out of the storm system. And again, I've got all the latest here for you in this evening's video. Now, if you're new here, welcome. My name is Gerald. I'm a meteorology major at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, here to give you the latest information, again, on what could be a life-threatening storm system here as we go through this week. Now, if you haven't already subscribed, please do so. It's a great way to stay up to date. We're very close to 10,000 subscribers, only about 100 or 200 away. So we've had incredible growth this week. Let's keep it up. Let's get to that 10,000 mark. And again, consider sharing the video with somebody that you think might find it useful. Like the video and comment. Let me know where you're watching from and how you're preparing for this storm system. With that said, let's go ahead and jump right into things because, again, what is about to become Helene here is definitely, unfortunately, shaping up to be a big-time storm system here. So latest satellite imagery, definitely a more improved looking system than we had this morning. Kind of the center of circulation is starting to get wrapped up under some of this big area of convection here into the Western Caribbean, and definitely a system that looks like it is trying to strengthen. It looks like it's trying to get its act together. And this again, likely could become a hurricane as soon as tomorrow. I would not be surprised to see that by any stretch of the imagination. Also, just look at how well this storm is ventilating. Look at these cloud tops. See how these are kind of fanning out well away from what is kind of that center of circulation right now. Again, that is a sign of a system that is in a primed up environment for strengthening. In fact, the only area that we're seeing a little bit of shear is maybe right here into this portion of the storm. But again, you look at this and 75% of the storm has very impressive outflow, again, indicative of a strengthening system. And I think that's exactly what we're going to see here over the next couple of days. Now, I'm going to go ahead and refresh here. We do have the latest cone now from the National Hurricane Center. This just dropped, and it's one that's not a great look for a lot of people, unfortunately. So again, still currently tropical or potential tropical cyclone number 9. Again, going to become Helene probably sometime tonight and or tomorrow morning. But again, very likely by the time you're waking up tomorrow, this will become a tropical system, and this is expected to strengthen. Again, the latest from the National Hurricane Center here. If you take a look at it, you get the gist here. A system that is going to become a tropical storm very soon, stay that way, strengthen throughout the day tomorrow. And again, I wouldn't be surprised to see a hurricane during the evening hours of tomorrow. And because of that, we do have hurricane watches up for the western coast of Cuba and the eastern bit of the Yucatan Peninsula here towards Cancun. And then eventually, this storm system very likely to get into portions of the Gulf of Mexico here just off the coastline of Florida, will likely continue to strengthen here, working up again along the coast. And latest forecast is now for a major Category 3 hurricane to make landfall somewhere into the Big Bend of Florida, anywhere probably from, we'll say, Cedar Key back towards Apalachicola, although Panama City, you're in the cone here, Destin on the cone. So really from Destin to, we'll even say the Tampa Bay area to play it safe here, kind of in the Clearwater area, is in this cone for potential landfall, again, of a major hurricane that would bring major hurricane impacts. And after that, again, that won't be the end of it. This expected to move all the way up through the Carolinas and continue to stay a pretty feisty storm here through the state of Georgia. Again, this could move inland, I think, through South Georgia, could move up through the Atlanta area, could move through the Greenville-Spartanburg area, and then eventually dissipating as this moves over portions of Tennessee by Friday afternoon and evening. So again, a storm that is not just a coastal concern by any means, one that we're going to have to watch for the long haul here, not just at the Florida Gulf Coast, but again, through the Panhandle, through the northern peninsula of Florida, through Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina. I'm watching you folks as well. And again, the hurricane hunters are in here investigating the storm right now. And they are seeing that we are getting very close to having a named system here. Definitely seeing an area of some general tighter circulation here. Again, just displaced from that strongest convection. And where we're seeing that convection, we are seeing tropical storm force wind speeds, at least at the flight level of the aircraft reconnaissance plane. So a strengthening system. Again, the hurricane hunters are down there investigating it. They're going to put all of that data that they're getting into the overnight models. And again, I think by tomorrow morning, as the models are running, we're very likely to see that data from an actual defined center of low pressure. And that'll really help us get a better idea of the exact track from this landfall. But all things considered, the models are actually handling the system pretty well compared to other storm systems that we've had. All right. So again, I just want to show you this really quickly. While they're in there investigating it, they are already finding, I'll go ahead and refresh this just so we've got the latest data here. They are finding pressure down in around 1,005 millibars near that center. And you can kind of see that on this graph on the top left. Again, you see kind of this blue line is our pressure line. Well, technically it's the flight level wind line, but here on our y-axis, we have the pressure. And again, you'll notice we're seeing spikes in wind with higher pressure indicating, again, areas of storminess, and then lower pressure with weaker winds here, kind of indicating the center of circulation. And again, this is right on the cusp of becoming our named storm, is what the hurricane hunters are finding as kind of the big takeaway there. All right, so latest information from the National Hurricane Center we just talked about. Again, aircraft reconnaissance is in there looking at it. Let's take a look at some model guidance. Obviously, this is something I think a lot of you are here to see, and we'll go ahead and show it to you. So we're going to start with the GFS model. I think the GFS has done a pretty terrific job so far with the storm system, and thus I'm going to show it to you because I think it's onto something with kind of the general forecast that it's portraying. So overnight tonight into early tomorrow to start our Tuesday, we are expecting this area of increased vorticity. Again, this is just the center of the storm getting its act together. And it's going to be very important how early on in the life cycle of this storm do we see this core get its act together and become strong. Now, the sooner it happens, likely the stronger the storm will be upon landfall into Florida, and thus the stronger the winds further inland, as the storm obviously will take a little bit of time to fully weaken. The GFS, again, really latching onto this idea as of late, and it kind of started this trend of the storm strengthening quicker. And by the time we get to overnight Tuesday into Wednesday, as the storm is crossing the Caribbean into the Gulf of Mexico, the GFS already showing a very powerful hurricane here, likely on the cusp of major hurricane status very early on. So again, the forecast is increased in intensity because of that. If we take a look at what this would look like on kind of our radar-esque map, if you will, or our MSLP and precipitation map, which basically just means this is showing you the surface pressure, the 500 millibar pressure, and or I guess 500 millibar heights rather, and then what radar would look like at the surface as well. So here we go. This is Thursday morning. Latest GFS has a powerful major hurricane Helene here with pressure around 950 millibars, just 100 or 200 miles off the coast of Southwest Florida here, and continuing to move north at a pretty quick pace towards the Big Bend and towards the panhandle of Florida. And it continues to kind of maintain intensity, if not strengthen a little bit more here, hooks it right. And by the time we're Thursday afternoon, we could have a powerful hurricane not far off the coast of Tampa Bay. And unfortunately, this would bring big time storm surge concerns into the west coast of Florida. Even if you're not getting a direct landfall in places like the Keys, Cape Coral, Fort Myers, up through Pinellas County and into the Tampa Bay area, you're going to get that onshore flow from, again, a very large and powerful system. And again, that's another thing to note here. Look at the size of this storm. I mean, it's basically the size of the state of Florida. And a couple keys to note with that: anytime you get a bigger storm system, that's going to increase, one, the vastness of the wind field. So more people are going to feel that wind effect. And I think that'll be particularly important as the storm moves inland. Also, it's going to increase the storm surge. Again, you've got this bigger wind field that's going to push more of the ocean. More people are going to feel the surge, even well away from the center. You folks up here into southwest Georgia along the coastline there, or excuse me, southeastern Georgia rather, through the Savannah area back down towards Tybee Island and Jacksonville. Again, it's such a large storm, you even could see storm surge here off of the Atlantic just due to kind of the vastness that this storm system has here in its general wind field. So the GFS, again, concerning picture there, continuing ahead. This is Thursday evening, about 6, 7, 8 o'clock Eastern time. This is when we have landfall, at least on this model, again, as likely a powerful Category 3, maybe Category 4 hurricane right into the Big Bend. And then this is when things go downhill inland. And I want you to note the speed of this system. Again, this is Thursday evening, about 6, 7, 8 o'clock. This is getting towards midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m. It's already moved from its landfall point in the Big Bend all the way up towards the Macon area. And then by the time we're waking up Friday morning, this storm is in the upstate of South Carolina or North Georgia. So obviously, it's going to take some time for that frictional force at the surface to mess up the circulation of this storm and kind of crash that wind field down. Also, as the storm moves inland, I would expect the wind field to expand some as that inner core deteriorates and all of that energy from the storm kind of spreads out here. So becoming very concerned here for a big time inland power outage threat due to some very high winds and even some, heavy rainfall and a bit of a tornado threat as well. And you'll see that we move this through Friday during the afternoon, the heart of the storm right over the western Carolinas, again bringing tropical storm force winds, heavy rainfall, and a bit of a tornado threat before, luckily, some kind of dynamic ingredients in the atmosphere and some terrain help us out and kind of really weaken the storm quickly. And then by the time we get to Saturday, much nicer conditions. So that's the GFS. Let's take a look at the European as well. And the key difference between the storms is intensity. And the main reason for that is what happens in the near term. I showed you the GFS really spins up the center of circulation quite quickly. We have a near major hurricane by the time this is crossing the Caribbean and into the Gulf of Mexico. Now, the European, not quite as excited in that idea of a quickly strengthening system, definitely does strengthen it here in the near term, but we're dealing with more of a tropical storm, borderline hurricane by the time it crosses into the Gulf, and because of that, it's a little less likely to see that rapid intensification, and then as we move it ahead into time, you get a storm that is a little bit closer to low-end hurricane strength compared to higher-end hurricane strength. Now, my personal belief is the GFS is going to be much closer to strength here. I do expect a Category 3 or 4 storm at landfall, and in fact, we can't rule out a Category 5. Now, that's not my forecast. It's not for a Category 5 hurricane to make landfall here into the Big Bend, but it's on the table. It is in the realm of possibilities here that the storm does get up to that strength. European, though, again, very similar track to the GFS, similar timing by Thursday afternoon here, moving towards the Big Bend, just with a higher pressure and thus lesser in the wind speed category here. But again, impacts remain relatively similar, just to a lesser extent. Landfall, also very similar time, kind of right here Thursday evening into the Big Bend of Florida, and then quickly moves inland, and by midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., moving up towards the Augusta area, and then by the time we're waking up Friday morning, we've got a tropical storm right over, basically Lake Hartwell, South Carolina, there towards the Clemson, Athens, Greenville, Spartanburg area, seeing that storm move inland, bringing, again, very heavy rainfall, very gusty winds. A tornado threat Friday afternoon could be on the table, and then again, kind of gets shredded apart by the Appalachia chain on top of some dynamical things happening in the atmosphere as well that we won't dive too much into. But again, just know, should weaken, I think, by Friday evening pretty considerably. But it's from landfall through Friday afternoon, and even, I guess, into Friday evening, I should say. I'm concerned about an inland wind threat, flooding threat, and tornado risk before, again, the storm kind of, I think, really is long gone by Saturday. All right, so those are the two main models. Let's take a look at that intensity forecast a little bit more in depth here, because I think that's the biggest wild card currently in the forecast for this system is how strong does it get? Well, I can tell you the ingredients are on the table, and the first one being big time, just really kind of off the chart ocean heat content here. And I've been mentioning this all year. If you're a longtime viewer, you'll know I talked about this in August. I talked about this, the rest of the month of September. I said the Gulf of Mexico is a ticking time bomb, and it's just going to take one storm. And unfortunately, here Helene is to become that storm that is going to move right over this rocket fuel of ocean water that is really yet to be touched by any storm so far this year. So it hasn't really been mixed. We haven't had any upwelling of significance in this part of the Atlantic Ocean. Because of that, we have water temperatures up near 90 degrees Fahrenheit right where this storm is going to move over. Again, currently kind of here, I'll draw the general path that it's expected to take, something kind of like this, we'll say. And because of that, again, it's going to move right over absolute just rocket fuel of ocean waters that is going to really enhance that latent heat process and really allow this storm to become a pretty big deal, and again, leading to rapid intensification. Now, that's not the only ingredient that could lead to rapid intensification. Let's take a look at the dry air versus humidity map here. Again, the greener colors are going to be more conducive for tropical development. The browner, kind of more dry looking colors, I guess, is drier air, and that would deteriorate strengthening of a system. Now, in the near term, now through, we'll say, at least Wednesday, there's not really any dry air in the vicinity of the storm. Again, here it is, and look at this big pocket of green around it. So that will not be a problem by any means. Now, dry air could become a little bit more of a hindering factor towards the end of the storm's life cycle. You'll notice here Thursday afternoon, probably about 6 hours or so before landfall, we are seeing some dry air kind of come out of the desert southwest that tries to wrap into the storm a little bit, but unfortunately, at this point, the storm has created a tight enough core and kind of, bands and bands outside of that core that the dry air is struggling to penetrate the storm. Again, the storm moves inland with plenty of oomph left to it, again, as a major hurricane before finally, by Friday, that dry air kind of funnels in on the backside. But unfortunately, at that point, again, it's too little too late. And in fact, that could actually increase the tornado threat a little bit as well. So that's another reason why it's very important. How strong does the storm get in the near term? If it stays relatively weak before getting into the Gulf, that dry air could do more to help us out. But right now, again, it looks like a pretty quickly strengthening system, and thus that dry air may not help us out all that much, here in the intensity forecast. All right, let's talk about wind shear. Obviously, another key for hurricane forecasting here. High wind shear equals a weaker storm and less likely for development. Low wind shear could equal rapid intensification with the ocean temperatures and the lack of dry air that we just looked at. So here we go. Let's take a look at it. Currently, winds aloft. This is at about 200 millibars, so this is well above the surface. In fact, this is probably even a little bit above where jetliners fly. But what you're seeing at this level is kind of just follow these streamlines or these kind of arrows I'm drawing and the ones you see on the map. Generally speaking, currently, the wind where the storm is fanning out. And when I showed you satellite imagery at the beginning and I showed you that outflow, this is why we're seeing plenty of divergence aloft, which is creating convergence at the surface. And as we see that convergence or air that hits each other, that forces rising motion. And then that rising motion leads to storm development, deepening pressure, higher wind values, and thus it just becomes this positive feedback loop before something kind of unravels that loop. Now, as we go further ahead into time, this is going to stay pretty similar. In fact, by the time we get to Wednesday into Thursday, I think the storm could be under some of the best conditions for development here. You'll notice right over the storm, a lack of wind shear. And again, out here, we're seeing still plenty of divergence. In fact, due to a bit of a jet streak here, due to this cutoff low over Arkansas, we could see really enhanced levels of divergence that really brings the flow out from above the storm. And that could really enhance more convergence at the surface here for a window of probably about 6 hours. And this is when I think we could see the highest intensity for this storm before eventually, upon final approach to landfall, I do think wind shear could become a little bit less conducive for strengthening. You'll notice some of these isobars kind of paralleling right over the storm, indicating, again, a little bit of wind shear working on into the system. And I think that's why the GFS kind of levels out intensity there through the last 6 hours or so of the storm before working on inland. Again, the takeaway there, the ingredients for this storm to strengthen are there, and because of that latest model guidance, again, most of the models get this to at least a Category 2 storm, but you'll notice even a couple here getting this up near Category 5 strength for a time being before making landfall. Personally, again, I think the highest likelihood is going to be right into this range, Category 3 to Category 4 storm, but we cannot rule out a powerful Category 5 storm that is potentially on the table. Unfortunately, I think tropical storm Category 1 is kind of off the table here. I think we're going to be well above that in intensity, and again, crossing up into major hurricane strength is my forecast, as well as the forecast from the National Hurricane Center for what it's worth here. So again, a lot of people agreeing that this could be a big-time storm system in terms of intensity. All right, we talked about intensity. Let's talk about track a little bit more. And luckily for us, it's kind of a cut and dry scenario here. Earlier this year, we've had plenty of storms that have been just an absolute nightmare to forecast due to kind of breaking down steering currents. Well, this one, again, it's pretty simple. We kind of have two big players on the field. We've got one ridge here off the southeast coastline, and I'll kind of draw what that does here with the flow. And then we have this cut off low pressure and this mid-level low that is over portions of kind of the Ozarks. And you put these two lines together, you get the general idea. Here's our storm. Well, where's it going to go? It's going to shoot the gap right between the two. And again, that's what's going to move it into Florida. Again, the Big Bend, the Panhandle, the West Coast, where exactly into Florida that moves is still up for debate. But most likely the Big Bend and then through South Georgia and then up through either North Georgia or the upstate of South Carolina and Western North Carolina becoming the most likely outcome, I think, at this point. For a inland track. So again, good news, the steering currents are pretty easy to see here. They're pretty easy to make sense of, and because of that, the spaghetti models are in very high agreement here. Anywhere from Apalachicola kind of towards the Tallahassee area is where we're seeing the tightest gradient right now. But again, I'll mention anybody from, we'll say, Destin all the way back down to Tampa needs to watch this for potential landfall. And then obviously anyone on the eastern side of that going to see the worst of the surge and the worst of the wind. And then again, most of the models move this right through either Georgia or South Carolina. A couple models get close to Alabama as well. But again, I think by the time this moves inland, it'll become quite lopsided. So the worst of this likely over Georgia and the Carolinas here by our Thursday overnight and into our Friday. Couple more models here just to show you the overall steering currents. These are the latest European ensembles. Again, seeing a tight cluster here into the Florida Big Bend, and then a tight cluster through the state of Georgia or the Western Carolinas once this moves inland. And I'll mention, I think by the time it gets past the mountains of North Carolina, this will be basically a shell of itself, and a lot of that dry air would have wrapped in by then, and I think the overall impacts you feel from the storm will go down significantly after Friday. So that's good for you folks up through Kentucky, Tennessee, Indiana, Illinois, and anywhere potentially after the fact that the storm could track over. GFS and its ensembles, again, a little bit more spread out, but still, we're seeing a pretty good cluster here into the Big Bend. And again, I think right now, this is the highest likelihood. If I had to draw kind of my own little cone here, somewhere into here is where I think the center of this low pressure is going to track right on through. So again, that's my forecast, and we'll see if it's right, obviously, but overall, again, models in pretty good agreement, all things considered. All right, let's talk about some impacts here because obviously we're getting close. Today is Monday evening. We could see landfall Thursday even. So if I do my math, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we're 3 days away. And in fact, we'll probably see evacuation orders within the next couple of days. So let's talk about why we could see some evacuation orders and who's going to get the worst of it. This is an absolutely amazing graphic that the National Hurricane Center and National Weather Service put together that shows potential storm surge out of this system. Now, what you're seeing right now is the probability of seeing at least 3 feet of storm surge. And again, the key is above you. So you see kind of the percentages marked up there. And you'll notice, again, the highest likelihood of seeing that right into the Big Bend of Florida, especially from Tampa northbound. Also, like I mentioned, the coast of South Carolina, Georgia, and back up towards Jacksonville, even a higher probability of at least 3 feet of storm surge. Like I mentioned, you're going to get strong winds off the Atlantic with a strong storm system like this. And with high tides plus the storm could unfortunately spell big time trouble here in the water department. Now let's move this up some. Let's say, what is the odd of seeing at least 6 feet of storm surge? And then I'll scroll this back down so you can see a little bit better. And let's zoom in here. Again, we're running a higher than 50% chance already of seeing at least, 6 feet of storm surge, which is, the height of, that's about as tall as me, is 6 feet here. And again, a pretty high likelihood of that here just north of, kind of the, let's see if we can find some towns here, kind of north of Yankeetown and the, kind of surrounding areas here of the Florida Big Bend, going to have the highest chance of seeing that really throughout all of the Big Bend. So I think that's going to be a big time concern, even up through, again, coastal Georgia. There's a chance we see this much storm surge, really the entire west coast of Florida as well. I'll mention Cape Coral, Fort Myers, up through these general areas. could absolutely see, even through the Port Charlotte area, 6 feet of storm surge, not out of the question. Tampa Bay, another place I'm concerned about, because just due to the placement of this storm, we could have, this says 40 to 50% chance of seeing 6 feet of storm surge. That's more than enough to cause problems, and a high enough likelihood we want to pay attention to it. And I'll go one level higher. Let's say, what is the likelihood of seeing at least 8 feet of storm surge here? And again, you'll notice still running near a 50% chance of 8 feet of storm surge, which would be near catastrophic for some communities here into the Big Bend of Florida. So again, storm surge is going to be the number one concern with this system, as it normally is with these tropical systems. It's going to be the same with Helene here as we continue to track it. So again, great map there, one that we're going to come back to in the following videos through the rest of the week. All right, tropical storm force wind speed probability map. Again, it says preliminary, and take this with a grain of salt because I would really bump up these numbers, but the NHC is notorious for starting conservative, which is a good thing, and then kind of ramping it up as we get closer. Although you could argue it might be easier to ramp down instead of ramp up, but either way, you get the point here. It does a good job of showing the general track of impacts, I think is the most important thing. Again, the core of this system going right into the Big Bend of Florida. And then look at this, already seeing the chance of tropical storm force winds just within the first day of having a cone here through Georgia and then western South Carolina. And again, I think this is going to be a storm that is going to have impacts felt well inland. And I'll continue to say that over and over again because that's kind of my gut with this. Well inland, Macon, Atlanta, Greenville, Spartanburg, Columbia, Augusta, Athens, southwestern North Carolina, through Brevard, Cherokee. Again, I think a lot of communities inland are really going to feel the brunt of the system in a big time way. With that said, let's go ahead and time this out a little bit more impact-wise with one of our hurricane models. This is the HWRF model, and we'll go ahead and start here. This is overnight Wednesday into the wee hours of the morning on Thursday. A very strong, again, powerful, probably Category 4 hurricane here just off the coast of Florida, just to circle some areas. This is Tampa Bay. This is Port Charlotte and kind of the Fort Myers area and the Cape Coral area of Florida. And you're seeing already these very strong bands moving ashore. This is going to increase that storm surge again along the west coast of Florida. We'll have a tornado threat with that. We'll have heavy winds and very gusty winds. Now we move this into Thursday morning by the time we're waking up, a powerful hurricane. Again, probably near Category 4 strength here, moving into the Big Bend of Florida. This will be the worst of the surge as the storm approaches. And this is when we could get those values of 6, 8, maybe 12 feet of storm surge. I wouldn't rule it out here. And then we get landfall. Again, a bit earlier on this model. This is more of a Thursday morning landfall, but most of the models agree a little bit after that, probably more Thursday afternoon or evening. And then the storm moves inland and we get these big time wind impacts well inland through South Georgia. I think we could see hurricane force winds again well inland past the coastline here through South Georgia, and then maybe even hurricane force winds into central Georgia. I wouldn't rule it out. And then we get here into Friday, or this is really Thursday evening, but again, could be a little bit after that, depending on exact timing here. We get tropical storm force winds well inland through North Georgia, western Carolinas, and potentially even northern Alabama and into the Chattanooga area before the storm dies out over the Tennessee and Ohio River valleys. By probably, we'd say, again, I think the model's off a little bit on timing here, so I'd say probably more like overnight Friday into Saturday. This model is almost a full day ahead of time here, so we'll see if maybe it's onto something with the timing, but again, I think probably going to be more like a Thursday night landfall, and then the storm dies out by Friday night and into Saturday further inland. All right, to show you some of these wind gusts here, and then I'll show you rainfall and let you go because, again, I know I've been talking a long time here. Let's take a look here. Potential wind gusts by the time we get into Thursday afternoon as the storm is scraping the coastline. Again, Tampa Bay, Fort Myers, I wouldn't be surprised to see hurricane force wind gusts even with the storm well offshore. Again, it's the worst of it's going to be on the east side, and it's going to be a large storm, so that wind field is going to be pretty expansive here. I mean, you see all these winds kind of moving up the coastline, but the worst of it, again, upon landfall here Thursday evening with winds gusting well past hurricane strength into the 100, maybe up to 130 mile an hour wind gusts. here wherever the center of the storm goes, and then it stays rough through the northern peninsula of Florida, through South Georgia. Again, I think we could see hurricane wind gusts well inland into South Georgia, and then by the time we get to Friday morning, widespread tropical storm conditions, I think, through western South Carolina, much of the state of Georgia. And I'll add here, again, this could be shifted one way or the other. This whole kind of wind field could get shifted this way a little bit. You never even know. Maybe it could get shifted east a little bit, but if anything, I think it would probably get shifted west just a tad here. But you get the point. A corridor of very strong winds moving through here, and this will be more than enough to produce power outages. Look at this Friday morning. We've got winds gusting up near 70 miles an hour through the I-85 corridor of upstate South Carolina. And I'll tell you, as somebody from this area and that lives in Charlotte currently, it's been a while since we've had a big windstorm in this part of the country. So we've got a lot of trees that have had a couple years to, maybe forget what it feels like. So this could be more than strong enough. In fact, would definitely be more than strong enough to produce widespread power outages. Also, side note, could absolutely destroy some of the fall foliage up on the parkway, depending on the exact track it takes. So again, don't say any of this to scare you. I just say it to make sure you're prepared, because again, it's been a while since we've had a big time storm through portions of Georgia and the Carolinas, especially further inland. Now, the coast of South Carolina and North Carolina have had a couple storms, but through the western Carolinas and Georgia, it's been a while since we've seen big time impacts. All right, total rainfall, and I should add, we're already seeing rain today, tomorrow, and probably Wednesday from a frontal system working on through this region. That's already going to loosen up the soil. Then you add another potential 4 to 6 inches of rain with half a foot to a foot of rain along those southern-facing slopes through Transylvania County, up through the Highway 11 corridor of upstate South Carolina. Again, a lot of rain on the way with this system as well. Very gusty conditions, and all around just not a very good time for anybody. Alrighty, folks. Well, again, talked about a lot today. Got a lot more that we're going to talk about over the next couple of days with this system. It's going to be a busy one for sure. But again, now is the time to prepare if you're in the path of this storm. Again, I've been telling you about it for a week at least. I said there was a potential of a storm in the Gulf probably even more than a week ago. Here we are. It's happening. So again, just kind of staying up to date here. And again, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. With that said, have a wonderful rest of your Monday evening. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you all tomorrow.